Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this installment of the National Conversations seminar series that is hosted by the Trade and Economic Development Unit from the University of the West Indies. Our discussion tonight is on expanding Trinidad and Tobago's non-energy exports and looking at specifically some of the opportunities and challenges that comes with doing so. In the recently published IMF 2026 Article 4, it highlights that the reality is that the economy is in a place of, excuse me a second, that the economy is in a place where we need to seriously consider the capacity for our non-energy export sectors. This is important for our long-term economic growth, especially given the maturing of our energy sectors. Tonight's discussion, we have and we will ventilate some of these points. Our panel this evening includes Mr. Emil Ramkissoon, Mr. Vivek Charan, and Professor Roger Hussain. So without further ado, I'm going to allow Emil to kick off our conversation. So Emil, I think he said he got kicked off. Let me just give him a second to rejoin the conversation.
Okay, just go back in. Sorry about that.
No problem, Emil. Please go ahead to chat with us about some of the capacities in terms of our non-energy export sectors.
I do apologize. I'm not putting on the camera in case it disconnects again because the Wi-Fi dropped in November. The opportunities and challenges that to the association. So this topic is really critical and is a vibrant conversation for us at the next 5 years under my tenure, which we have developed.
Hi, Emil. I think you're coming in and out. Are you hearing us clearly? Is anyone else hearing Mr. Ramkissoon?
I'm not hearing it.
Hi, Emil. Can you hear us?
Let me call him.
Okay. So what I'm going to ask is Vivek, can you proceed with the discussion, and we'd allow Emil to chime in when he gets back in the room.
Yes, thank you for that, Rebecca. Good evening, everyone. Very happy to be here today. With regard to the conversation tonight and talking about, what are the challenges in expanding or building the non-energy sector? My response or my contribution is really going to be less macroeconomic based and more and more based on some of the granular things. I do believe, more now so than ever before, that the path forward, especially for SMEs in retail, um, is one in which they must have some diversification component of their business. And by this, what I mean is um, there must be an element of their business, a subsidiary of their business that they would have diversified to. That would include um, import substitution in whichever way, whether that be through light machinery, whether that be through processing, food processing, assembling, um, less so re-export, and also, you know, the movement after having done this towards export, particularly, let's say, in the Caribbean market, South American market, before even looking, you know, on a wider basis. And the reason for that is we know that there's a considerable amount of work being done to rebuild the energy sector. We know a considerable amount of resources and work is being done to, you know, to ensure that there's a supply of gas coming to Trinidad, whether that be from Venezuela, whether that be from our own waters, whether that be Dragon, whatever it is. These things are already in place. The 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 fact that we have confidence in that is a good thing. However, we must be realistic about what our expectations can be. And the general idea across most of the SMEs would be that when this happens, possibly in 2028, that we're going to see an immediate change. We're going to feel an immediate sense of relief because this relief is based on the supply of Forex. The idea that when Manatee, when Loran, when Dragon Gas, um, once it's on stream, once it's been monetized, that is going to bring an immediate change in terms of the amount of US dollars available in the country compared to you know, how things have been before. And possibly it's going to mean an increase in credit card limits and so on. So I want to, you know, I want to frame that from the perspective that the economy as a whole is dynamic and continues to be dynamic, irregardless of external forces that have acted upon our economy, irregardless of what happened during COVID, regardless of whatever you know, foreign conflicts and other things like that that have, you know, had effects on us. Our economy on a certain level continues to be dynamic and change. And one of the results of that is the continued increase and demand for US dollars at this point in time has never been greater. So what that means is if we look at the period, let's say 2010 to 2015. 2010 to 2015 was not that long ago, but it was a period, particularly earlier part of that period, where people felt, you know, we had very high credit card limits, US dollar limits. There was enough US going around, even when at the end of 2015, you know, when that, you know, when that shortage or that supply of Forex started to become challenged, there was still the feeling that, you know, there was a lot. And compared to then, and if you compare now, at which point in time we have $2,500 US on our credit card. The bank has now said 500 US. New people get 500 US. You can't have multiple credit cards with the same amount of the same credit limit. It does differ from bank to bank. It does differ from whether you're commercial um, or you know, personal. But the fact of the matter is the demand for US dollars has continued to increase significantly. So what we have to take into account is whether these increases that we're going to see in the energy sector, which is primarily where the government and the central bank is going to get the majority of their US dollars from, whether that can meet or even exceed what current demand is going to be. And that is even, you know, I would say a year and a half, let's say two, let's round it up to 2 years from now. And the answer to that question might surprise us. The answer to that question may be that it may not. It may not greatly exceed what the demand for US dollars would be at that time. And one of the reasons for that is we have seen, particularly during COVID, because of the previous government and the policies they put in place when it came to business. Um, those that they had deemed necessary, particularly food distribution, particularly pharmaceuticals, general manufacturing, and so on. They went through a period of, I would say, great economic prosperity, a boom, as it were. And that boom has pretty much carried them over and allowed great expansion. And if you want to actually understand what that is, you have only to look at the number of supermarkets within any particular area that have continued to pop up almost every single year, including major chains, additional chains that have begun to pop up. You only have to look perhaps at the amount of new malls that have been growing up as a result of supermarkets expanding. Um, whether that be in Samoa, whether that be in Trin City Mall. Trin City Mall now has a situation where we had not seen in Trinidad except for Chaguanas when it happened, many, many years ago, where you basically have huge malls in walking distance of each other. Trin City Mall, Eastgate, Naipaul Plaza, Piaco Plaza, Pennywise Plaza, and there's another one scheduled to be built there as well too. When you look at the fact that all these malls are going to primarily have, SMEs. Yes, they may have banks. Yes, they may have, well, they already have supermarkets in them. Yes, they may have some big draw stores, as it were. The fact of the matter is that it is mostly retail businesses are going to be in here. However sustainable that is, I'm not sure given what the supply of US currently is. But nonetheless, they have gone up. Nonetheless, they have been powered. They have been powered by the I would say supernormal profits that particular sectors, food retail, food distribution, pharmaceuticals and so on, toiletries and so on, toiletry distribution, toiletry retail has had over the years. So when we look at that, it gives us a very strange, I would say a disproportionate picture of where the economy is right now. On the one hand, we see rapid and large expansion within certain sectors. And on the other end, we see what is a contraction in a sense, right? I feel it's a contraction because as chairman of the Confederation of Regional Business Chambers, I speak directly to a lot of the members of our member chambers. And people's financial positions isn't something they always feel comfortable speaking about publicly. They will complain publicly about broad policy-based things. I'm not getting enough US. The banks are tough on me, that sort of thing. But when it comes to the actual financial circumstances, they tend to become very private. But but my general sampling of what people are going through now in the SME sector, particularly, and I think the sampling is very wide, and I think it's quite deep. I could say it's from all the way down east as far as Valencia, and all the way down as far as Point Fortin, Faizabad, all those places, right? And there is a lot of issues that they have in the bank, renewing facilities, renewing um, overdraft facilities, extension to facilities, a lot of continual issues with how much US they're getting. Yes, they may get a 5,000 US or 3,000 US, but it's nowhere near what they would want. Obviously, as time goes on, this is going to affect the amount of goods they're going to be able to buy to stock their shelves, primarily because they're in retail and primarily because most of what they sell and most of what is demanded of what they sell are foreign goods. Now, when we look at the near future, 2028, the idea that there's going to be more gas and more US coming in, we also need to understand that the expansion of particular sectors, food distribution, continued expansion of pharma sector, in addition to that, the demands of the manufacturing sector, as the government themselves have set targets for the manufacturing sector, as the manufacturing sector themselves are continually looking to access new markets within the Caribbean area, broader Caribbean area, South America and beyond, then obviously the inputs to the manufacturing sector is what we're going to have to use for what are going to have to be purchased by through US dollars, buying US dollars locally. And yes, as their exports increase, so too there's it is said that they're supposed to reinvest some of that US dollars into into their budgets and so on to purchase what they need. But nonetheless, a lot of it may still come from our banks, from the government through places like the Exim Bank and so on. And as it is now, the amount of US demanded by the manufacturing sector, according to what they say, is not nearly enough. So what I'm trying to say here is that growth can happen within the economy. Growth can happen, and it appears that it will happen. How this growth is actually going to supply is going to affect the supply of US dollars is something that we have to be careful of what our expectations are. And our expectations, I believe it will be wise for us, very, very wise for us, to not sit and wait until 2028 to see what will happen and see if a lot of US dollars will be available. And there's two other reasons why, right? One is that if we look at, we continue to see foreign franchises coming to Trinidad and Tobago, particularly in the fast food area. We continue to see expansion of fast food franchises and franchises generally across Trinidad and Tobago. Also multinationals. And when you look at for example, even PriceSmart and so on, and when you look at all of these institutions, have to, they have to get TT dollars, to put it simply, they have to get TT dollars out of Trinidad and Tobago to pay their parent company. Then that is also going to be a significant drain on US. And there have been many of them that have been waiting a very long time to get their money out. So when the money does start to get in, what's going to be the situation with them? In addition to that, the government also has a substantial foreign debt that has to be paid in US dollars. And that debt was in part accumulated and increased. So bearing all these things in mind, an increase of US dollars can happen. How far down that increase in US dollars will go? Will it lead to the things that we directly want to see as a sign of success when it comes to US dollars, which is, first of all, for business and citizens, an increase in credit card US dollar limits? We don't know for sure whether that can happen. The second thing, at this point in time, we can't say for sure. And the banks have their own metrics, as we know, by which they will deal with these things. The second thing is, will more US dollars, and considerably more US dollars, not just more, we're not talking about, well, again, 3,000 or 5,000 now. In 2 years' time, if I get a 8,000 or 10,000, I'm going to be happy. People are thinking that in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, they're going to be getting 20,000 again, 25,000 again, 50,000 again, even more. And that is something that I don't know whether we can predict for sure is going to happen. I think a lot of studies, a lot of analyses have to be done to determine exactly what those income streams, when they get monetized and come to Trinidad and Tobago, how far down it is going to reach. But that leads me into why I'm saying that diversification into manufacturing, processing, agro-processing, agriculture is so critically important for SMEs. And when I say SMEs, I'm not only talking about family businesses, because it occurred to me that when I talk about SMEs, when many of us talked about SMEs, we talk about generational SMEs, which is a thing and which is very prevalent within that sector, about two generation, three generation SMEs. But we've forgotten the fact that opening a business of their own, right, is something that many families dream to do. And the fact is, a large number of startups happening every year that end up being successful and are able to continue to grow from year to year is a sign of health. And so we also need to include startups into that, startups into small, medium, or even micro businesses as well. And to base your startup or to continue to base your generational retail SME on the retail alone considering the volatility and the uncertainty when it comes to future forex inflows. I wouldn't say just the inflows, but future forex directed supply directly to our sector, SME sector, speaking for myself and the people I represent. Um, we have to be careful. And that is why more than ever we need to consider diversification. I keep saying it, diversific, diversifying into manufacturing, processing, agro-processing, assembling, or something along that line. One of the issues with that, ladies and gentlemen, is whereas the will is there, um, the path to diversification, particularly for SMEs that have been saddled with debt after not being able to earn income for something like 2 years, saddled with moratorium payments and so on. It's a difficult process, particularly because I can't figure out what is the roles of the commercial banks in Trinidad and Tobago when it comes to the rebuilding of our economy, or the commitment um, the commitment to help the economy continue to evolve and grow. From our perspective, getting financing for diversification projects is very, very difficult. If at this point in time, businesses that have had decades-long relationships with the bank are currently embroiled in months-long waiting and discussing and negotiation with the bank to renew existing facilities that allow them to operate and increase their cash flows amidst I would say, slow commercial sales or slow commercial activity. The idea that these banks are going to readily fund um, new businesses is not something that is going to come easy. And I think that is something that we need to draw to their attention. I drew that to attention. I was invited to PSOT about 2 weeks ago. I drew that to the attention of BAT, Banking Association of Trinidad and Tobago, with which we had a meeting with, which is asking them what they see as their role moving forward. Is it to support diversification? Is it to support rebuilding? Is it to support SMEs and startups and so on that want to get into export related or manufacturing related? There wasn't a direct answer, but what there was an affirmation that the risk level in Trinidad and Tobago is quite high, or the level of acceptable risk that the banks are using currently. I would say for new business and existing SMEs and so on, as a going concern, is quite high. Why that is so, when many of the SMEs I speak to are continuing to be able to pay their financial obligations to the bank, are not directly in arrears, um, have huge liabilities with the bank in a sense, but are able to, pay what those monthly liabilities, what necessitates the payments towards those things would be. But not necessarily earning the kind of income that they would have earned, I would say pre-COVID and so on. But the idea that the banks are less inclined to take on the risk to support them through this period, when they should, given the fact that it is in the bank's best interest to continue to service the needs of the client so they can continue to pay what they owe, and seeing that some of the assets that they're holding may not be easily um, um, sold, as it were, or they will get the value of what the actual debt is at this point in time, considering some of these assets would have been held for, I would say, 10 years or 10 years in a 30-year mortgage loan. I can't speak to how, I don't think that they're doing what it necessitates. One of the ideas is that existing exports and existing manufacturers are going to take us out of this slump. And I have to gently push back on that, because the manufacturing sector needs to be broadened. Large companies who are making profits, even at challenging time in the economy, are less likely to take the risk They're less likely to take the risk to diversify into something completely new when they're already doing so well in what it is that they are currently doing. What is the economic reasoning behind that? How can you justify that to a board? Why are we going to divert so many millions to diversify into this thing simply because we are told that the economy is going to be better off when we are already making so much millions in profit doing exactly what we are doing, whether that be importing food items, whether that be importing um, OTCs or prescription meds or toiletries or whatever. Um, there is no incentive for them to do that. So the people who are willing to take on the most risk to diversify in this country, ironically, will always be the SMEs, will always be the people who have a need to, find themselves in a better financial position, who have a need to augment their income, increase their income. But the path to do that, there are many barriers and bottlenecks. One of the greatest bottlenecks to that, after we talk about financing from the banks, which is collateral based, which where an SME already has collateral being held by the bank. What is the collateral that they're going to use to start up this new business as far as the bank is concerned? Will the bank take the machinery? Will they be able to take the machinery? In, um, most of the startups are not going to say, well, I am going to build, and I'll come to that in a few seconds. I'm not going to build a whole new factory. I'm not going to build a 2,000 or a 5,000 foot warehouse. I just want to get into this thing, get it up and running and start to generate income rather than continue to increase my cost of diversifying and getting into some aspect of manufacturing or import substitution or processing or whatever it is. So here we come to the point where we need to access, or SME who wants to diversify needs to access a space by which they can set up their factory. Believe it or not, the actual cost of machinery from the Far East, whether it be India or China or wherever, is actually quite cheap in the scheme of things. It may be, surprisingly, your cheapest factor of production that you would have to put out, given the scale of competitiveness in China, given the amount of factories they're churning out actual machinery for any number of items that manufacture any number of particular items. There are a lot, and it is very competitive, and it is quite affordable. More affordable, I would say, than buying a 7,000 square foot piece of land somewhere in central Trinidad. Not even, I would say, in a very high commercial area like Port of Spain. So the price of land in Trinidad and Tobago, the price of real estate is a real barrier to entry when it comes to finding a space to set up your factory when you want to diversify. The second thing is very high rents. I myself have been looking at rents over the last couple of years. There are, and I could list at least 7 or 8 very large warehouses that have sat on the market for the last 3 years, um, at a price of $30,000 to $50,000 a month plus VAT. And they have been sitting there for the last 3 years and nobody has rented them. And the owners are not going to drop the rent. So that's an indication, ladies and gentlemen. And then there are smaller ones as well too, which are just as high. So again, it adds to what your cost would be in a startup, and it's onerous, I believe, in a sense. When you're getting into, let's say, an element of manufacturing, yes, you could do your market research, but you can't unless you start to produce. You are not going to have contracts. And if you don't have contracts because you can't go to a company abroad or locally here and say, this is what I'm going to make, will you give me a contract without you actually having a good to sell them? Makes no sense, right? So you can't use that. So most people, you're going to end up getting into it after doing your market research, and then you're going to try to enter the market after you have begun production. And here I'd like to add that the idea of tax incentives, tax breaks, and tax cuts to encourage people to diversify doesn't make sense because those only affect people who are already in production. What we want to do here, what I would hope the government can assist us to do, because certainly um, there is a great need for assistance if this is going to happen, and it needs to happen, is that there needs to be affordable or concessionary leasing arrangements below market price for real estate currently. E-Tech was supposed to be this place. After the government have changed, we've heard many things about E-Tech. We've heard that many of the properties were not used for the purposes they were said to be used for. Many of them ended up being warehouses. Many of the tenants were not paying their rent for a very long period of time. That led to many of the parks falling into disuse. No resources were allocated to the parks at that point in time. The parks were full to a large degree with non-paying tenants. And it was said that there was no space and so on, right? So there were a lot of things that I would say was not managed right with E-Tech under the last admin. They're trying to fix that now. It is going to take time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that space is going to open up in a large way. And even if it does, some of the places I've visited, it is going to require an investment on the part of the person setting up to get the place up and running to what it should be, in addition to E-Tech having to put out money of their own, which may be a challenge. Seeing the amount of debtors when it comes to the amount of rent that they're owed. They need to also look after some general infrastructure. And speaking about infrastructure, many of the warehouses for rent in Trinidad, even some of the cheaper ones, for example, very small ones, not 100% suited to manufacturing, but it could do. The landlords don't want 220 and three-phase and 330 volts, 440 volts, and so on. They don't want to pay more for electricity kiosk that's going to cost them $10,000 a month. And their reason is if something happens and the tenant leaves, then they're going to be stuck with the bill. And so many of them say, no, we don't have that, and no, we're not going to allow you to put it in, even if you want to put it in. So this speaks to us about industrial parks. This speaks to us about one of the key things that has to be done if we want diversification to happen is we need to build industrial parks where SMEs and new entrants into first-time entrants or startups into this non-energy sector, productive sector, hopefully targeting exports as they develop, can start up, in a crash kind of scenario where the cost to entry is lowered because the initial rent lease that they have to pay is way below what the current market says it should be. And if this doesn't happen, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be very difficult to get the change that we need. And that's quite a simple thing, right? Not so simple when you look at how we go about, how you go about managing something like that. But certainly there's a very key component into developing that sector for new entrants and startups and SMEs who need to certainly attempt that diversification away from only having all their eggs in one basket in retail. And it's funny that we use all the eggs in one basket analogy or argument, as it were, when we talk about the government and energy. We say, well, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has for so many years has all their eggs in one basket, and look what has happened now. And I could say now we're in a similar situation for those of us who are in the private sector. Do we have all our eggs in one basket? Do we have all our eggs in one basket when it comes to those of us in retail and reading, and I'm in a position where I see I see things broadly because the information comes to me broadly. And so I have no choice but to look at it that way. And exactly what I've said to you today is my honest assessment of how things are. And that worries me. It worries me because despite the gains that we can make in the economy, the fact is, will those gains be large enough to give people the results that they're drastically hoping for? And in a sense, what I have to say, and I can end on that, is basically um, we have to make our way as well too. And we have to start really looking. And a lot of people are, I would say, frustrated. Frustrated because whether we like it or not, I can't blame a government or the government for the total failure of um, let's say people in the private sector, companies in the private sector, startups in the private sector diversifying. A lot of that I have to lay at the feet of the banks because everybody is going to need financing of one sort or the other. And the government cannot finance us all. They simply can't. So unless the banks themselves change their risk profile in a sense, and not just talk, which is, oh, we have loans for this and loans for that. But yet when these applications reach the risk in the majority of the banks, they don't go any further. They don't go any further. So unless the banks really adjust that risk ratio that they have right now, um, that number one is our greatest barrier. Second barrier after you get through that hurdle is cost to entry when you talk about real estate and setting up your factory. The rest can happen. I mean, a container of raw material, I would say, for light manufacturing can quite easily cost you less than a container of finished goods that you want to bring in to sell in your shop. So it's a win-win scenario here where there's a possibility that if you get into light manufacturing, you will end up spending less US dollars to bring in your raw material in the beginning as you begin to start up. Yet you'll be able to sell more of it. You might find an easier market in Trinidad and Tobago, and hopefully, if you market it there, CARICOM. And that's why it's essential that when we talk about diversifying, we don't talk about it simply on a macroeconomic perspective. We really have to understand where the bottlenecks and barriers to that. And we have to find a clear path for people to follow and understand where along this path, right, the greatest hurdles lie. And some of those I've tried to show you what it is today. I myself, the Confederation of Regional Business Chambers, we work together with PSOT, we work together with the government, and we are desperately trying to identify to them too, so that we can all work together and find a solution through it. It is my hope that you will also join and also help assist in finding ways in which we can create this path to diversification. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the honesty and the information in terms of the live bottlenecks that your membership faces. I am going to invite Emil to bring the TTMA's perspective. Emil, can you hear me?
Could you hear me this time?
Yes, we can. Great.
Right, so I'm going to just talk from the TTMS perspective. I do have vivid challenges. You took it from a more macro level rather than narrow level that probably TTMA, we advocate for certain things as an association to get manufacturing going, especially you mentioned the SMEs, The SMEs are very critical to TTMA because we realize, the larger ones are already the bigger players in the market. They have all the export potential, they have all the access to information, they have all the testing that can be done. They've been doing this for decades, whereas we realize the SMEs have not. So we have took it upon ourselves at the TTMA to really promote small medium enterprises. What we do, we have something called the Export Action Program that is in a collaboration with the Exim Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. And you did mention that the Exim Bank does fund our raw materials, but currently we have been seeing a lot of gaps in the Exim Bank allocations for raw materials. And the reason for that is that, they're tightening up on the foreign exchange allocations. Some of us may have seen it in the papers where, they highlighted companies that were, I don't want to say they were abusing the system, but they took exorbitant amounts of US dollars out of the bank. So I mean, myself as a company in New York marketing, use the Exim Bank, and I've been seeing how they have been tightening gaps in the allocation. They're making sure you're compliant with all documents, all BLs, C82s. They're not paying invoices more than 3 months old now. They're doing checks and balances on all the suppliers. They are reaching out to suppliers actually to find out if they're legitimate, funny enough. But at the TTMA, you said growth of the SMEs. We have something called the Trade Investment Convention, and this year the theme is One Vision Global Connect. And why we came about with that team, we realized that TTMA is TIC, Trade Investment Convention, is not just a convention locally, it's not just a convention regionally. It's the biggest platform for the Caribbean and parts of South America, and even um, certain companies that want to exhibit around the world and bring their products to Trinidad and Tobago. Um, you
That's
know,
way of making the character. But it always defaults to a kindness act. And one of the things that I kind of look for that I've noticed that most models get wrong is the safety.
yeah, so TIC really encompasses a wide array of other global buyers coming to Trinidad and Tobago to see what our manufacturers have to offer. It's the biggest platform. Our show is always sold out. It's in literally 3 weeks' time, June 9th to 11th. This is the biggest trade investment convention show yet, with 400 exhibitors. It consists of both manufacturers and service providers and regional partners. And a lot of the embassies have partnered with us this year because they realize TIC is really the platform for the ultimate networking and seeing where they could take our manufacturing products to their countries and get it going through different trade routes, through different using the non-tariff barriers, different regulations, how we could work on partial scope agreements with the government and their government. And that's the work we do at the TTM. We advocate for these types of agreements to ensure our products get out into the global market, not just the CARICOM market, which we are accustomed to. Coming out of that, I just came back from Guyana yesterday. TTM is on a trade mission right now to Guyana and Suriname. I couldn't make it to the Suriname leg of it, but the Guyana trade mission, this has been the biggest trade mission that the TTMA has embarked on. We had over 64 participants consisting of 38 companies, and what you would find in the Guyana trade mission is a lot of returning companies because they find the value in the work we do at the TTMA. We work with the best consultants on the ground. I see um, Dan Rogers in Quad, he could tell he has been to a few of these missions. The export generation that comes out of these missions, yes, it does not happen the day of the meeting and the day of showcasing your products, the day of doing, site visits to various distributors. But it's a work in progress, as we tell the delegation. Don't just go to the mission and meet potential and don't follow up. It takes time. It takes a lot of following up. It takes a lot of retooling your products. It takes a lot of sending samples. It takes a lot of investigation, seeing what the market requires. So especially in the food and beverage sector, when we go to these trade missions, we're like, hey, don't just rely on your meetings. Go out to the grocery. So we plan little trips to the groceries, the bigger distributors, see the products on the shelf, see the prices you're competing with. We offer this type of advice in our trade mission. Um, as I said, the mission went on to Suriname. So Suriname is also one of our biggest destinations on a trade mission. So that's why this year, we said, let us do a week-long trade mission to Guyana and Suriname. The flights to either country, Trinidad to Guyana is 40 minutes, Guyana to Suriname is 30 minutes. We make it an all-inclusive package where, you get your flights, your hotels, you be dealing with similar consultants. Um, and vice versa, Suriname and Ghana have a very healthy trading relationship. So, when you go on all three, you get the support of the same distributors, the same buyers, and they see and they see where TTMA really brings our members, especially manufacturers. And it's funny enough you mentioned SMEs. This is the first time the Tobago House of Assembly partnered with the TTMA on this mission. They brought at least 5 SMEs to the mission, and I was really impressed by the products seen on the mission from the Tobago House of Assembly. You saw a lot of the beauty side, you saw a lot of the food side, and so far the feedback we're getting from them is that they didn't know that this existed, and to know that we could actually start to put Tobago on the map for exports and growing the non-energy manufacturing sector really speaks a lot to the work we've been doing at the TTMU, because I mean I've been sitting on the board since 2020 and we always have been trying to find a way, how to include Tobago. We've been to Tobago a few times, visited. I mean, I previously sat on the board of the Bureau of Standards, where I went to the opening of the Bureau of Standards in Tobago. And I mean, we didn't see much progress out of it. I mean, I really don't know where it's going now. But I really hope that, this new government could take the Bureau of Standards to a next level in Tobago. Because the Bureau of Standards actually plays a critical role in a lot of the testing products in conjunction with Kariri. So this is where we partner with the different state agencies, to inform our members, these services are available through the government. Most times it's free of charge. Most times it's a just incentivized price, and you take your product to that next level. Of course, we have challenges in the manufacturing sector. Vivek did mention we have a lot of global disruptions. I mean, right now I feel like we're back to COVID, where shipments that usually take, let's say, 20 days on average to transship, it's taking 2 to 3 months because you're getting quotes from different suppliers, then the price is changing next week, even though you may or may not confirm it. Then the ship is stuck in a transshipment port. You're not getting proper ETAs on the online systems. They're not meeting the transshipment vessels. So now next transshipment vessel is in 2 weeks. Even when that vessel reaches to collect the cargo, it's not it's what's on priority or what was left behind a month ago. So it's a lot of geopolitical tensions that are causing these transshipment issues. A lot of raw material suppliers aren't quoting because they don't know where their materials stand in terms of pricing. No, I mean, we're getting reports from a lot of our members that materials are doubling in price. I know that could really take a toll on the manufacturing sector. And as we say, we're heavily dependent on still the foreign exchange to buy the raw materials. And say you get 200,000 from the Exim Bank in an allocation, where are you gonna, so now you have catered for 200,000 in raw materials for the month, but then your raw materials now cost 400,000, where the Exim Bank has cut back. So as manufacturers, we really have to always think outside the box, how to retool in advance. As I said, I feel like we're going back to the COVID days. So apart from that, we have some, the VAT refunds really causes a backlog in the system. For a lot of our members, we have been waiting on VAT refunds for the last 2 years. I mean, we have asked the government time and time again, when can we expect VAT refunds? And that is causing us serious cash flow problems for a lot of our manufacturers. So at the TTMA also, we have always been trying to double exports. We've always been trying to grow the non-energy export side of it. Um, Last year and coming into this year, we decided on a figure to achieve by the year 2020, which is 10.6 billion TT dollars. I mean, we don't know how attainable it will be, but we are asking for the government support in helping us achieve this figure. So we have came up with 5 strategic critical pillars. Firstly is improve access to foreign exchange. Yes, it will dig a little more into the Exim Bank and the Treasury, but with the tightening up of the restrictions, I think it is possible. Enhanced trade facilitation. So we're asking that the trade attaches that were brought back to Trinidad and Tobago when the government changed, that they were reappointed. We have met with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so that's the level of advocacy we do at the TTMA. And right now we're working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Trade in collaboration to say, hey, these are where we need trade attaches enabled to grow exports into Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, I can't say the countries because it's a bit confidential. So that's where, we want stronger trade facilitation. Right now, we're trying to keep our relationships with Global TT, which is a state entity that has actually a lot of facilities under their umbrella, but a lot of it is on pause because it's financing in terms of the machine grants, grants and testing products, a lot of those things. Asking for stronger export financing mechanisms, investment into productivity and innovation. So when I say investment in the productivity and innovation, we're lobbying with MIC, Kariri, we're lobbying with UTT. Actually, we had a healthy discussion with UTT. They want to expand their manufacturing courses in at the UTT to help and partner with the TTMA. So they're trying to find out exactly what needs our members want from students coming out of the UTT, and then they're going to partner with us. Usually, the partnering goes in the summertime, so from June to August, where we members take in students to learn different parts of the manufacturing sector, whether it's in mixing of raw materials, whether it's in operating the machinery, inspection of final product, quality control, all those different aspects. So, what we look at the TTMA and what we lobby for through the Ministry of Education, through the Ministry of Youth. I know a lot of these things did exist under NETCO, but NETCO, I mean, changing government again, the priorities are shifting into different ministries. So, like Vivek mentioned, E-Tech Park, right now, E-Tech Park needs a little revamp. We right now our members are asking how to get land and factory facilities, but they're saying it's full. We don't know how true it is, but we continuously work with E-Tech um, to ensure that this is done. I mean, I know a lot of our members did acquire through the new Phoenix Park, through the new park in Shogunas, these I don't know off the top of my head, the Diamond Vale Park in Diego Martin, the one in Caroni. So, we know a lot of our members do exist in these parks for manufacturing, but right now, we still need access to these parks because non-energy manufacturing, believe it or not, is growing. The SME sector is growing. They need space, they need help, they need to access these different systems under government agencies to grow. Um, and then the last pillar, which, well, I mean, I believe I touched on it on most of my presentation, sustain public-private collaboration. Without this, I believe I mean, the private working together is always, there's so much the private sector could do, but if the government doesn't support us, I mean, we know under the Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, a lot of the state entities have been moved around. So, we are working with different ministries right now to see how we could push TTMA forward. Um, so one of the things, we do at the TTMA also to promote manufacturing is the illicit trade. There's a lot of illicit trade products coming through the backdoor channels of Trinidad and Tobago. We don't know whether it's through suitcase trade, whether we know sometimes they say cargo divert from a different country and the vessel changes and the container and the seal number changes, and then by the time it goes to the scanner and talking to customs, um, they say like by the time it leaves the ship to the scanner, somewhere or the other it has a change. And I was shocked to hear that the scanner doesn't actually sit at the port. The scanner sits at a different facility um at the point Lisa's port. So that's where the change happens and nobody is unaware. Um, I mean, we're getting reports from a lot of our manufacturers in the food and beverage sector, the alcohol sector and the tobacco sector, where you're seeing the illicit trade rising. And a lot of this happened because the government imposed the excise tax to 100% on locally produced alcohol and tobacco. And right now we're still advocating for a reduction in the tax. Um, we are having several meetings with the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Trade. So that goes back to my point. We're not just taking it from a Ministry of Trade perspective. We're trying to reach different ministers to get the work done. And as I said, TTM is all about advocacy. We are about representing the manufacturing sector and really pushing that growth forward. TTMA, at the anti-illicit trade desk, we have a seat at the anti-illicit trade desk in conjunction with, I think, the Trinidad Chamber of Commerce and some other working groups. I mean, we do make significant progress, sorry. The tobacco sector and the alcohol sector, we have, we get a lot of intel from various sources, and we're able to do some, I wouldn't say drug bust, but some, what's the word, some, some counterfeit bust, working with the TTPS customs, border state agencies, working with actually customs in different countries, so we're able to track things, track where the counterfeit products are coming in from. And this is where, at the anti-illicit trade task force, we reduce the illicit products coming in to increase manufacturing in Trinidad and Tobago. And yes, alcohol and tobacco, I know, is not the healthiest option, but it's all about getting manufacturing products out there and getting it export. And another manufactured product that we have under this task force is the cleaning chemicals and agents. I mean, we've seen it, but it's not as rampant as those two other products that I mentioned. Just to touch back on our trade missions, I mean, TTMA, really and truly, apart from doing regional trade missions to get exports going, we have taken a decision to do extra regional trade missions. So we went to China and India. I was actually on the India trade mission, where all the resources we have from the bigger manufacturers, all the resources we have from experienced manufacturers, all the consultants using the embassies, trying to twin those two major countries with the biggest trade shows to invest in machinery, raw materials, reinvest, ask our manufacturers, hey, widen your scope. That's where we take TTMA to the different step. And I mean, on the India trade mission, it was about 25 companies. And I mean, funny enough, a lot of deals are finalizing, and we are very happy about that. The China trade mission was a really successful one. We actually signed an MOU with the head of the vice president of the Canton Fair at that time. So, they are incentivizing, working with the embassies, they're incentivizing these trips for us. Because again, getting access to US dollars to pay for these trips is not the easiest task. So when you work with the embassy, they actually say, hey, well, TTM is making an effort to come to our country to seek investment opportunities in machinery, raw materials, and getting that subsidized rates on different things really help us. I mean, we stayed in hotels at like next to no prices. So really and truly, at TTMA, our trade missions are really successful. For the balance of this year, we're going to Panama and Curacao. This will be our second time to Curacao and our first time to Panama. We listen to what our members want, and we plan. We are going to Miami, and that Miami trade mission is really to target the food and beverage sector, because the food and beverage sector have an easier entry into the United States. They're already there. And I think it will be good for us to go to Miami and see the distributors that exist, the potential distributors, seeing how we could get certain products into certain groceries, like the Publix, the Winn-Dixie, the Costco's. That's what we look at. And we have the contacts. We have been doing this for years. We work with the embassies. Angostura Bitters. I mean, everywhere we go in, Angostura Bitters is famous. So that's, we do a lot of work in-house. And yeah, that's it for me on my end. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Emil, for adding some of the on-the-ground details in terms of what has been going on at the TTME and what has been working well. I know that our audience tonight particularly appreciates the live bottlenecks and the live challenges that both yourself and Vivek brought. And I know that at this time, I want to ask Professor Hussein to tighten our conversation for the evening. Professor Hussein, you can go ahead and share your presentation and proceed.
Okay, Rebecca, thanks. Good evening, everyone. Are you all hearing me?
Yes.
All right, so it's 8:01. I always prefer to give our guests, the chance to speak, and we just host. I will try to see if I could run through my slides in about 8 minutes so that Professor Gonzalez, Dr. Tiwari, I'm seeing Wendell Motley on, and a few of the people, our guest, Mustaq Mohammed, could get a chance to raise questions if they see necessary. So what is the state of the economy? Not good. Not good. You see the real effective exchange rate, which I consider one of the most important macroeconomic indicators of our health, has remained fairly buoyant. And this is after natural gas production basically collapsed over time. So it's something that we have to keep an eye on. And here we see the comparative good performance of the Trinidad and Tobago economy, where you see the real GDP in the global economy has gone very clear north, whereas Trinidad and Tobago's real GDP it has been very subdued in the last 10 years or so. And in fact, it is about 16% lower than it was in 2015. The scary thing, and both Vivek and Enel spoke to this, is the state of our net official reserves less external debt. I mean, that to me is one of the things that has me most concerned about the Trinidad and Tobago economy, and I will elaborate that as we go along. Now, what we have on the horizon, I think, is two potential Brian Lara, two potential Messi. If one of these, Messi or Brian Lara, could really click, we would find ourselves in a good position. Kama Maharaj has announced $5 billion increase in the exports of non-energy exports of goods and services by 2030. I used the same apportioning of services export and non-energy exports in 2025, scaled it to 2030 to increase it by 5 billion, and I gave prospective numbers there. So we basically have to add on about 4 billion to goods and about 1.5 billion to 1.25 billion or thereabouts to services exports. That's a tall order. And the minister did outline, and the ministry did outline a series of steps that they will take to meet their target. If they meet this target, the Trinidad and Tobago economy would have staved off a lot of pain, a lot of problem, a lot of situations. For those of you all who read the IMF Article 4 report in detail, I generally never read the report itself. I look at the data, and the data tells the most disturbing of stories I have seen in a long time. But I have confidence that someone like Kama Maharaj, who has been in the export business for a very long time and who exports products all over the world to various countries, non-energy exports, would have an idea about how to export. And I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt that he knows what he is doing. And I read what he said is his pathway, and I'm hoping that it works out. Now, when I look at the relationship between the real effective exchange rate and the number of sectors with a comparative advantage above 1, it has me worried because, and I was surprised that after the real effective exchange rate cost what I will call a baseline value of 100 as we progress in expansion space, the amount of sectors with an RCA above 1 actually climbed. And that to me is because of the CARICOM market. In fact, if we go to this next slide here, I did calculate the RCA with CARICOM and extra CARICOM countries for 2013 and 2034. And if you look carefully, you would see I will say in 2013 extra CARICOM, I will say 2013 CARICOM. It moves from 15 to 41 with CARICOM. So, and only 13 to 29 with the world, or 11 to 14 with extra CARICOM. So the real run scoring comes within the region, and now is therefore a very good time to live good and to build bridges and to make use of the fact that whilst it is difficult for us to penetrate and grow in the extra regional market, within the regional market, we have some potential. And to me, if I get a US dollar consultancy from CARICOM, or I get it from Geneva, or I get it from the government of India, I'm not bothered. US dollars is US dollars. So I think if we get it from CARICOM, we take it. I simply show the descriptive statistics associated with the RCA distribution for 1995, 2010, and 2024. As you can see, the kurtosis and skewness values remain high. So that's a concern there with time. Now, I calculated a transition probability matrix of Trinidad and Tobago export structure to CARICOM from 2010 to 2024, where A, B, C, and D are 4 states. A is no comparative advantage, B is weak comparative advantage, C is moderate comparative advantage, and D is strong comparative advantage. And the numbers to look at is this 0.417 here, this 0.333 here, and this 0.333 here. Dr. Gookool, are you seeing my cursor when I move it?
Yes, Prof.
Good. So for one reason or the other, likely linked to preferential markets, we are seeing that commodities with weak comparative advantage over time have been able to move into areas of moderate comparative advantage and even into strong comparative advantage. And the same here, from moderate comparative advantage to strong comparative advantage. So there are some enhanced possibilities of working within the CARICOM sphere of mobility. I also did it for the extra CARICOM sphere, and you could see from A to B is low, A to C is low, A to D is low, B to C is low, B to D is low, C to D is reasonably high, but all the others are low. I also calculated an overall mobility index for Trinidad and Tobago goods to see if it moves up to higher levels. Within intra CARICOM, it's much higher than the probability of moving up within the extra CARICOM sphere. I used 3 mobility indices, the Shiraks, the Bartholomew, and the Summers-Hirschman, and I'm confident in these numbers. So the regional market cannot be easily ignored. I then went along, and I know that Professor Gonzalez is on this chat. I hope he's still on. And I developed, Professor Gonzalez, a typology to classify how we could look at our trade goods with CARICOM, intra-CARICOM and extra-CARICOM. I use regional comparative advantage, reveal comparative advantage. I use RCA or reveal comparative advantage, regional orientation index, trade complementarity, and trade can. And I created a typology of dynamic regional competitive sectors, constrained regional competitive sectors, and so on. And I went on to actually calculate for 3-digit data, and I have students working on the 6-digit version, the possibilities. And there are quite a few possibilities. I also looked at the non-energy export opportunities of Trinidad and Tobago within CARICOM and beyond CARICOM. I did all of the calculations here. I want to limit my time to about 6 to 8 minutes, so I'm moving on. I then went on to look at the size of CARICOM and how it changed. And then I looked at each partial scope trade agreement with Panama, Guatemala, Chile, Colombia, Curacao. I calculated the trade complementarity values and took the average for the period 2000 to 2024. And then I classified our various trade opportunities. I looked at our CARICOM trade partners with strong trade complementarity, and then the trade complementarity with some of our bilateral trade partners, and looked at the opportunities for growth therein by a number of metrics. I then looked at the tourism population arriving in these countries, and I developed something called modified tourism equivalent population to show that these countries are critical for us in terms of the number of tourists that they receive, and I only focus on overnight visitors for a while. I looked at export potential, and I modified the unrealized export potential using a tourism adjustment. So because I felt that the ITC, the international trade map information, needed some improvement. And then I took Antigua and Barbuda, and I actually worked through for Antigua and Barbuda the tourism adjusted export potential, given the numbers that I have. I'm in the process of fine-tuning this by dividing the export potential goods into goods that are highly correlated with tourism inflows, moderately correlated, and weakly correlated, so that when I put this information out for the manufacturing sector, they would have more accurate information, highly specific. And then I looked at some of the ways to go forward. I'm putting a lot of work into this study, Dr. Gonzalez, and trying to get the trade dynamics correct. I find it very difficult to communicate with the Exim Bank. From all my communication, they don't reply. But I'm glad to hear that email said that they are tightening up and improving, and that's good. I think eTech Park is one of the goose that lays the golden egg in the room, and we should definitely capitalize on them. I think they have a big role to play in the way forward. I also focus on the CAP system, which is an internal monetary payment system within CARICOM countries, not using US dollars. And I focus on 15 policy solutions. I just outlined a few here, but I would stop here, Dr. Gookool, because I think once you have people like Professor Gonzalez, Mushtaq, Wendell Motley, and Dr. Botiwari, we should give them a chance to raise a few comments, and I could always respond if I get the chance later on. So thank you.
No problem, Dr. Hussain. Thank you so much. I think this definitely added some details and clarity and layers to our conversation this evening. So, gentlemen and ladies, I am going to open the floor for a round of questions and or comments. Please raise your hand and I will invite you to unmute your mic.
Yes, Roger.
Hi,
I was
Dr.
very
Gonzalez.
yes. Hi, Rebecca. Yes. I was very interested in what you were saying there. I would have liked to be able to read what you produced. You have some very interesting data. There's some interesting analysis of competitiveness. We hear a lot about us not being competitive. I think one of the last speakers in fact said that we are not competitive as an economy, and there are several factors which are impeding this competitiveness. But you seem to suggest that the economy is competitive and that we are particularly competitive in CARICOM, much more than we are outside of CARICOM. Now, I want to suggest that the fact that we have duty-free entry in CARICOM and that the markets in CARICOM are growing. Just remember that Guyana and Suriname are growing very fast. I mean, look at the size of the Guyanese economy now as compared to just some few years ago. Suriname is growing also fast. Jamaica has come up as compared to what it was some years ago. It is not going as fast, but it is up. And the rest of the economies are doing okay in terms of tourism, and the economies are growing, which means that there's a potential for them to import from Trinidad. Now, we have not, and I think you have produced this statistic, we have just supplied 4% of what the CARICOM countries import, which is very, very small.
3.2.
Yes, a very small amount, which means that there's a lot of scope still for us to export to the CARICOM market. So I'm wondering to what extent is the competitiveness factor something that is not as critical in CARICOM as it is, let's say, outside of CARICOM, and it is much more the facts that we are operating in a market where we have preferential access and where, you know, we are familiar with, we have distribution outlets there, and so on. And it's probably that is what is driving our industry to go into those markets.
So, Rebecca, do you want me to respond to that, or you prefer email?
Well, I'm going to ask if anyone has any additional questions
Okay.
so that we can have the panel. Mr. Gosain, please go ahead and unmute your mic. I see that you are physically raising your hand.
Yes, I am. I'm listening to everyone, but I believe that the problem that why we don't so much feedback. I believe that the main problem is we are not. Are you all hearing me properly?
Oh,
Yes,
we are not
Mr.
hearing.
We are not
Mr.
hearing, we are
Gosain.
not hearing.
Mr.
There's a
Gosain,
problem with the audio.
put the question in the chat if you are getting challenges.
Yeah, I will. Okay, thanks.
There's a problem here with the audio.
And I'm also noting that Mr. Mustak had his hand up as well.
Yes, to the panel, right? Two things for me. One is, Prof, is that data helping to inform government policy? First
Okay.
question.
I would respond to the questions.
Right. And
In
then,
three,
and then,
in three in order. All right, yes.
and then the second question is this, right? I know we want to talk about manufacturing and export differently from the energy sector, right? And I don't want to bring the energy sector into the conversation, but there are a few things, and this is particularly related to the service sector. We have seen major changes in the energy economy in the Caribbean over the last 3 to 5 years, right? We have seen what happened in Guyana, and we see now what is about to happen in Suriname, right? And I think we have a wonderful opportunity for how we market our services sector to these two. And if I look at your graph points to $8 billion increase in services, less so in manufacturing and more so in services, right? So I think the opportunity and the experience we have built for so many years in the energy industry, not to compete with oil and gas production, but how do we get into these markets to provide services? Just this week, one short comment, the European Union was down here talking about port management. And we are in such a fortunate place having deep water drafts, we have good port infrastructure, we have good logistics capability. And when I look at Guyana and Suriname, both of them are so restricted by the geography of the countries where they exist, deep water ports, etc. So what I'm really trying to point to is we have a base that we could build out from, both in making services available to the countries around us that developing. And I don't want that base to take second place to getting into too many things that are a little bit far from our reach. So let's look at what we have. Let's look at what's happening in the region, and let's try to apply our skills to capture in those markets in terms of trying to drive non-energy but related revenue generating opportunities. That's kind of a comment.
Thank you so much. I noticed one comment from Mr. Motley. He's raising his hand physically. Mr. Motley, go ahead. You can unmute your mic and
Yes.
join the conversation.
Can you hear me?
We can.
I want to emphasize the point that Mustak just made. We have a tremendous capability in energy services. Look at what Chinle has done with Tembladora and moving to service Guyana and Suriname and so forth. And that's capable of rapid expansion. I also want to ask, was it Vivek? When you talk about expanding SMEs who are in retail into manufacturing, are there examples of success in doing that already? Because it's two different skills altogether. I'm just curious about those two. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. Vivek, are you on? Are you able to field some questions now? Hi,
Yes, of
Vivek.
course. Hi.
Awesome. So what I'm going to allow both my speakers, Professor Hussein and Vivek, Emil had to drop off, is to address those questions, and in your wrap up, touch on the Ministry of Trade plan to be able to generate this $5 billion worth of exports in the next couple of years. So, Professor Hussein or Vivek, who would like to kick us off with the questions?
Let Vivek go first.
Okay.
He's our guest.
Awesome.
All right,
Vivek?
thanks. So what I want to say is that from what I understand, from what we have been working on, we have been working on together with PSOT and lobbying with the Ministry of Trade to find alternative sources of financing. Some of them are becoming more relevant, some of them may come, and continuing to work with them will help define what the outcome is as we move forward. And we're hoping for a positive outcome. The reason for this is, Dr. Hussein talks about, and even the minister himself, and even Emil, they talk about SMEs already in the manufacturing sector. What I am saying and what we are saying is that that is not going to be enough. Professor Hussein hinted at a $5 billion target. $5 billion target cannot just include existing exports and existing players in the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector, as successful as it is right now, is not as wide and as deep as we would like it to be. And so it is our hope that by transitioning people who are already in retail SMEs throughout the country into some form of manufacturing, that this could both broaden and help populate the manufacturing sector to become an even more powerful source in Trinidad, whether that just be for simple single-use items or whatever it could be. The second thing is I see Dr. Tiwari in the audience, and I remember in his last incarnation as Minister of Development and so on, they had spoken about growth poles throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Talking about the prosperity of our country based on how much US dollars we coming in is an important discussion to have. But we also have to look at what do we do to increase the prosperity of citizens? What do we do to keep people gainfully employed through what could be, I would say, a challenging future in the non-productive, the non-energy sector, if it is, and outside of existing sectors like distribution, pharmaceuticals, and others that I've named. What does it mean for people, particularly in rural areas and so on, and getting jobs and staying gainfully employed? When it was SMEs and retail in particular that would soak up a lot of the unskilled labor, and particularly, let's say, more mature women and that sort of thing. Well, I have to say that and it showed when we had that maxi taxi strike. One of the largest costs for people or workers in Trinidad and Tobago is the cost of transport. Now, a lot of people, if they can't find work in their area, be it a rural area, and I say in rural area in a very broad way, right? Which is outside of a big commercial area like Port of Spain, Shagona, Sandy Grande, Arima. Is the cost of transport $50 a day, which means that when they can get a job and they work out the cost, the cost for their week just to get there, it doesn't make any sense as they see it to work, and then they're coming home with what, $300-400 for the week. It is not going to do anything. A couple of weeks ago, I came back from Vietnam, first time in Vietnam. When I went to Vietnam, I went to look at garment factories. What surprised me about Vietnam is that they're nowhere near China in terms of development. They're pretty much a new developing country, even though they've been manufacturing for a while. But it reminded me a lot of Trinidad. So 2 hours out of Ho Chi Minh City, which is really one of the biggest cities there, you're going into, let's say, something similar to what sugarcane country is like, right? Where you have a lot of land and it's empty and it's agricultural land and there are pockets of tongs and things all over the place. But what I saw there was quite encouraging was that even within here, so you're driving through back roads, and there's a huge amount of small manufacturing garment factories here. Probably hiring about, I would say, 15 to 20 people, not more than that. And the majority of those people are women. Yes, men. Men would be the ones who would do the cutting and moving of the material and so on. But when I went into these factories, and I have the videos and the photos to prove it, they were sewing FIFA World Cup aprons for Home Depot employees. They were sewing clothing for Alo. They were sewing clothing for a lot of these American brand online companies. And how that worked was there was the actual business in Ho Chi Minh City that was doing business with these American companies. And they had a cooperative among many of these small garment factories in these rural areas, very, very rural areas, very, very undeveloped areas, where many of the local people were able to find employment in these many, many garment factories. And together, the cooperative of garment factories would do one order of a particular thing for this larger company in Ho Chi Minh City for export. And so what you had there is an ecosystem which both brought Forex into the country, which established an export structure in a sense with large commercial international entities, but also on a developmental level provided employment for the very vulnerable in a sense. People who don't have that ability to be as mobile as they could be because of the cost and so on, right? And it's my hope that in Trinidad, by developing the non-energy sector, by providing the path towards diversification for SMEs where they can do things like that, where they can find the cost to entry is low enough that they can do things, and then we can create clusters, which is something PSOT was talking about, or cooperatives within there where many of these smaller factories can produce together, right, the volumes needed for export. That is what, that is key. But even before we get there, we really have to determine what are the bottlenecks, because all the conversation to me, right, and respectfully I submit this, all the conversation centers around how do we get our existing manufacturing sector to ramp up and access new markets and to increase production. It doesn't really, we're not hearing the conversation saying, how are we growing the manufacturing sector? How are we growing the manufacturing sector in a way that we can develop our rural communities, that we can bring some kind of prosperity there, some kind of employment there, how we can use cooperative structures to assist in our export drive, and how do we bring new entrants doing new goods and new services that we don't already have within the manufacturing sector. And the easiest way to do that is by removing the bottlenecks that previously I spoke about before. I understand what all these good gentlemen are saying about how important all these other services and so on are within the energy sector, and they're 100% correct. But that is completely different from the fact of the matter is that the majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago may not find themselves working directly in an energy company, may not find themselves working directly for an energy services company, but they may find themselves out of a job. They may find themselves unable to obtain employment. They may find themselves unable to travel to where the large, all these things are happening with regard to a rejuvenated energy sector and stuff like that. There are huge pockets of people in rural Trinidad and Tobago in which there used to be a thriving high street of SMEs that is less than thriving at the moment. And that spells And you see, that's a silent thing that's happening that nobody's really talking about, right? But if these high streets were to diminish, their capacity to create income diminishes for themselves, and therefore their capacity to sustain the communities within their in also diminishes. And that's a dangerous thing going forward. So whereas we're going to see, as Dr. Hussein says, economic growth on the books, we see the figures saying we got economic growth. How is that actually going to be reflected? Up and, well, I wouldn't say up, but down, down into our citizenry, down into all these other rural areas where SMEs at one point in time could sustain not only themselves, but sustain the community. And that's why this is critical, right? Because many of the things we talk about in the energy sector and all the gains that we can make in the energy sector is not directly going to transfer down to these communities. And when I say communities, I get the idea that we're talking about one or two because the word itself sounds small. I'm talking about small, right? Because of, being in the Confederation has opened my eyes when I had to visit different regional chambers all over the place. And you have a feeling that when you travel far enough to see a small business chamber, that this business chamber is landlocked for want of a better word, but that's how I want to describe it. They're landlocked where they are because most of the people there seek employment, with that high street and with the businesses in the area. And the people that do tend to be the most vulnerable ones, the ones that are not going to venture out, unlike the younger ones may, right? And so there's this huge age gap between, I would say, school leaving age and early 30s. This huge gap between, let's say, 35 to retirement age, at which point people need to work. And these older people, particularly women, they're the ones who tended to find jobs and so on and work within these rural communities in the SMEs. And so by rebuilding the SME sector, through their diversification into small and light manufacturing and processing and so on, we also help the communities. We help increase employment in the communities. And we help the most vulnerable in the communities as well, too. And that is something, and that's the benefit of it. Because the more the energy sector grows and its demand for skilled labor is going to increase. And the skilled labor demand isn't going to translate or absorb employment in a lot of these areas across our country, both here and in Tobago. So then what are we going to do? We're going to wait until there's some critical situation where on the books it says that we have 3% economic growth, we have oil coming in, forex reserves are increasing, and we can prove it's increasing, yet credit card US dollar limits have not increased, yet SMEs still can't get US dollars. Yes, SMEs, because they're diminishing, there's less employment among the majority of the communities in Trinidad and Tobago outside major commercial centers. How is that going to look if we get to that particular situation? That's not going to be I don't think that's going to be the best thing for economy. I don't think that is going to give the kind of benefits that we want across the length and breadth of the country. And that is why this push for diversification is a critical one, not just centered on exports and bringing US dollars into Trinidad and Tobago, but it has to do with the prosperity of those communities and how it is that the people in those communities get some kind of material benefit or be able to financially support themselves through these times.
Thank you, Vivek. Professor Hussein?
Okay, so Rebecca, I know we have run out of time. I will just quickly respond to the 3 questions.
Please.
Mustaq asks if we are regionally competitive relative to the extra-regional, and yes, definitely we are much more regionally competitive as compared to the extra-regional sphere? Will this inform government policy? I hope so. We keep putting out these national conversations. I recently got some feedback from the Minister of Trade himself. So I think comments do reach some of these places and spaces. And either way, we at the university have to keep pushing the information in the public domain for policymakers to see if it is useful. And the last comment was about our base. Well, we do have a low electricity rate in comparison to other countries, good port infrastructure and whatnot. And that's what probably is helping our manufacturers increasingly dominate the regional market. So there is a platform to build on. There's also a significant amount of work to be done. But we at the university, we are hoping if we put some typological structure and methodology to help identify the lowest hanging fruits in the foreign exchange market, both regionally and extra-regionally, using 3-digit and then 6-digit. The 6-digit data is already done. Just needs a little more cleaning up. But by next week or so, we should have that. Put it in the public domain for the and let the policymakers see what is useful in terms of their targets and deploy them. We are also going to put about 15 to 20 strong policy suggestions to help, because this is a time to choose moment. This is a time to choose moment. I have read the IMF report, not an AI version. I have done the underlying calculations in a model that I have. And without frightening the public on what I found, this is a time to choose moment. And I hope that policymakers look at the data in the IMF report, because therein lies the substantive facts. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Professor Hussein, and my heartfelt thanks to the rest of the panel, Mr. Emil Ramkisoon, Vivek Charan, and of course, Professor Hussein, for being my anchor panelist for this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our monthly conversations that we have on macroeconomic issues. Thank you for joining us. If you do want to keep abreast of some of the conversations that happen apart from this platform, please feel free to send me an email or reach out to Professor Hussein. He has put his personal contact number in the chat for that purpose, and we look forward to adding value on a monthly basis via these platforms. Have a pleasant evening, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Much excellent conversation. Bye-bye.